This lesson, we're going to jump into our editor and we're going to build out an AJAX request using just plain JavaScript, so no libraries, and we're going to make it reusable. So wrap it into a function so that we can grab it and reuse the code, and then from the show results, we'll call over to that function. So we're going to pass in a parameter, and that's going to be a URL. So let me set up my URL for that. And for here, we need to grab an endpoint. So a URL that has an endpoint. A really easy one is random user API. So it usually works without a lot of configuring or sending any headers. And let's add that URL in there. So this is the endpoint that we want it to connect to. And now we're ready to build out our function. So let's do that now. So creating a function. And this is where our AJAX call is going to sit. We can call it AJAX if we want. AJAX.js. And we need one parameter, and that's the URL. And also, within here, we're going to be returning back a callback. So we've got a callback function that we're loading in there, and then when we call that, we're going to be doing a response function. So once we've got callback in there, let me move this up a bit. I'm going to add some space so it's more centered. So AJAX.js. So what it's going to do, it's going to look like just a regular XML or XHR object. Give it a variable name of XHR. So new XML HTTP request. This creates our HTTP request object. And then with the HTTP request, we need to do two things. So one, we need to open up that object, specify a method. We're going to be using get, because all we're doing is we're not posting any data. All we're doing is retrieving data. And the next value is the URL and whether we want it asynchronous. So we're going to leave it as true for asynchronous. So XHR. And then next, what we need to do is just send it. So there we go. So we've created our XHR request. It's all been sent. And next, we need to check for the ready state. And the ready state changes. There's a number of different states. There's actually 5 different states. And we're going to be listening for a change on the ready state object. And when the ready state makes its change, then we fire off a function. And for now, let's just console log out that XHR. We'll just console log out the whole XHR object. So next, what we need to do is we need to set up our function to call for the AJAX. And we want it to pass through this. Next thing that we want to do, we want to make use of that newly created AJAX function that we just created. So let's set that up. And in here, we need to pass in a URL. And also, we're going to do a callback function. So this function is going to respond back with the response data that's going to be sent from the AJAX request. And what we want to do is console log this out. So this is response. So we're console log out that response object. And we're still not returning anything yet. So let's set that up as well. So we're console logging out the XHR on change, and we're also gonna call back. So we'll just use that function callback. So the one that we're stating in here, that is going to get fired off, and that's going to be equivalent to over here. So callback, and within the callback, we'll just return back ready change for now. And we'll update that later on. So let's try that out. So there we go. So we clicked it, and we fired off our click. So we don't actually need this one anymore. That one's a little bit redundant there. We know that we've clicked it when we see something happening, and we see that ready state change. So every time the ready state changes, we fire off and we get that callback function, which is actually what we're logging out here within that response there. So every time it changes, it fires off. We get the console log of the entire ready state object. And here we can see that we go through all the ready states here. So we start out at 0. And the ready state changes to 1, then we fire off this function. Ready state changes to 2, we fire off the function. 3, 4, and then finally, when it gets to 4, then this is where we get our information, such as the status of 200, and we see that ready state is 4. So this is the one that we're ultimately after. We want to make sure that it gets to ready state 4, and once it does, then we should have Once it does and status is 200, then we should have some response text there ready to go. So let's update our function to match that and actually return back that object information. So instead of ready state change, we need to have a few other parameters here that is going to be looking to make sure that our XHR object is ready to go. So we're going to have a condition here and XHR ready state. So we're going to look at the ready state value. And just like over here, that ready state is 4. That's the value that we're looking for. So we make sure its ready state is 4. And we're also going to make sure that the XHR status is equal to 200. Now you could potentially go with just the ready state 4, but usually it's better to have 2 checks just to make sure your status is 200 in case the status comes back a 404 and then you try to get your response text and you encounter some type of error. So let's account for that, and then once that condition is met, then we know that we can have our object there, our data. And what we can do is we can do a JSON parse because it's coming back within a string format and we're expecting JSON. So the only APIs that we're connecting to are going to be all JSON formatted. And then now let's grab from the XHR object that response text and send that back. And we're still just logging out whatever that response is. So now we've made some changes. We should try it out, just make sure it works. So what's going to happen now when I click the button? We've got our event listener here listening for the button click. Let me move that in so we can actually see. We could also break that up into several lines, but because I'm on a half screen here, it is a little bit hard to see. But basically, we click the search button, we have that event handler, which fires off the show results function. Show results function passes in, well, we've got a URL here, so it passes that URL and has a callback function here where we do something with the data on the response. And then what we're doing is we're just simply console logging it out. And in the upcoming lessons, we're going to actually output it. So we're just making sure that our AJAX.js function is working properly. So next over here is the AJAX.js function. It takes 2 parameters, so URL and callback. And we're loading the XHR object. We're opening it up and we're sending it to the URL that was sent within the parameters. And then on ready state change, we're listening for the ready state 4 and status to be 200, because then we know that we can get the XHR response text, whatever that might be, and we're using JSON parse to return it back in a JSON format object. So that should load out within the console. So after all of that, let's try it out. So there we go. So we did get the results back, and we can also customize this. So if we just wanted the info, we could get the info there. If we wanted the results, this is within an array format. And at this point, we could actually loop through the results. So more on this coming up. We just wanted to make sure that our AJAX.js, our AJAX call in JavaScript is fully functional, returning back that response data. And then this is a function that we can reuse over and over again because it's always going to return back whatever that response text, and we can customize it for however we need it because we are connecting to do 2 different endpoints. We're going to connect to Wikipedia and we're also going to connect to the YouTube API. So the idea here is that we've got an input field. The user enters in a search term. We return back some Wikipedia information, and we also return back 4 sample videos that they can click and open up in YouTube. So building this out is coming up next. Try it out for yourself, open up your editor, and make sure that this function is ready to fire off. You can try various API endpoints as well, just to make sure that you are getting that response information in there. So go ahead and try it out for yourself, and next lesson, we're going to continue to build this out.